LIBOR, the London interbank offered rate, is the average cost of borrowing as Britain's banks lend each other money. It's calculated daily based on information supplied by those banks.
Barclays Bank admitted that it rigged the London interbank offered rate from 2007 through 2009 to show that they could borrow money at a lower rate than they actually could. Why did they do this? To make themselves look like they were financially better than they actually were. Why does this rate matter? Because LIBOR is used to determine the rates of things such as credit cards and mortgages, over $800 trillion worth, which is 12 times the total GDP of the world.
LIBOR is in everything. It's in mortgages, it's in credit cards, it's in all kinds of investments. And LIBOR is like the sun at the center of the financial universe. It affects everything in the world, basically.
Britain's anti-fraud investigators are to look into the LIBOR interest rate rigging scandal. The Serious Fraud Office probe comes after Barclays chief executive Bob Diamond resigned over his bank's role in the manipulation of the interbank lending rate.
They cheated you!
They did that for two reasons. First, they wanted to hide how weak the bank was during the financial crisis. Second, they wanted to profit by manipulating the rate.
This, my friends, is called insider trading, and it's insider trading on a scale the world has never seen.
Even the tiniest manipulation downward, when you're talking about a thing of this scale, would result in tens of trillions of dollars of losses. So it's an enormous scandal. And B, the banks weren't doing this just to make themselves look healthier. They were also doing this just to make money. They were trading against this information in what essentially was the biggest kind of insider trading you could possibly imagine.
Traders at banks like Barclays were essentially conspiring to fudge this data to boost their own trading profits.
16 banks all submit their different rates of what they believe borrowing should be, what the cost of borrowing is for them. But instead of that, the Barclays submitters submitted what the trading desk wanted them to do, what would be good for the trading desk.
A former Barclays executive who left his job over the bank's interest rate fixing scandal has testified he was directly ordered to manipulate interest rates by former CEO Bob Diamond. Diamond resigned earlier this month, just days after Barclays was fined $453 million by U.S. and British authorities for manipulating key interest rates.
Barclays has managed to make the headlines, okay, because it is accused now of submitting dodgy rates. In other words, its estimate, what it thought it would cost to borrow, it's accused of not telling the truth, if you like, in order to flatter the profits that the traders on its derivatives desk.
Did Mr. Diamond lie to the Treasury Select Committee?
I'm not going to speak to Mr. Diamond's testimony.
So you're not defending him?
I'm not going to speak to his testimony.
Under your chairmanship, a great British bank has been dragged through the mud. Are you ashamed of that?
I regret deeply what has happened to Barclays, and I have said in my resignation letter, I am truly sorry.
The height of the 2008 crisis, there's no doubt that effective instructions were coming down right from the top of the banks onto those members of staff who should be setting LIBOR independently. In other words, the whole of the bank was in it, the whole of the bank industry is in it. So it's a massive falsification of a system which is corrupt and a system which is failing.
Yesterday, the FSA published notice that Barclays had on numerous occasions acted inappropriately and breached Principles 2, 3 and 5 of the FSA's Principles for Businesses. As a result, the FSA have imposed a financial penalty of £59.5 million on Barclays. The email exchanges between derivative traders and the LIBOR submitters read like an epitaph to an age of irresponsibility.
When I read the emails from those traders, I got physically ill. It's reprehensible behavior.
Diamond says he didn't tell his traders to lie about LIBOR, but it turns out one of his subordinates did and misunderstood what Diamond wanted and then directed traders to lie over the LIBOR figures.
Is it an illegal activity? Come on, answer it.
It's not quite like that.
Well, it's not a yes or no
answer,
really?
Mr. Rafley, and
really,
that was
through 2005, 2006, and early 2007, we see evidence of systematic greed at the expense of financial integrity and stability. And they knew what they were doing.
But this isn't a scandal about LIBOR. This is a scandal about the business model of these banks, which is actually lie more. L-I-E, lie more.
I like that. That's good.
That's what's going on here. They will do anything. Look, Bob Diamond at the head of Barclays said, it's time to stop looking at the banks. We need to move on. Remorse is over. No investigation, nothing to see here. He sounds exactly like another Diamond, the Diamond in the U.S. Jamie Dimon saying the same thing.
More about him later in the show. You're exactly right.
Yeah, but these guys are all trying to say, don't look into us. We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't have something to do with it. You know, it's like, move on, move on, move on. If anybody stops for a moment and seriously investigates what these banks did in the run-up to the crisis and after the crisis, we'll see this day after day after day because corruption's at the core. Lie more is what they've done. Lie more is what they do. Wall Street is a high-crime area. We need to send the cops in, and nobody wants to do that.
But this is the worst abuse of trust in a British bank in living memory.
They, being Barclays, rigged the LIBOR. Well, this made the banks winners and the rest of us, whose money they used to make their bets, the losers.
If you have a mortgage, as an example, or you have other debt, well, your interest rate's higher, and that's money out of your pocket. Now, here's who doesn't have money out of their pocket. The banks that are fixing the LIBOR rate. Now, who are they? Well, we know Barclays. They've already come out and admitted that they did that, and their top 3 executives are gone, which is huge. Doesn't normally happen, but they have actually stepped down. Must be a different country. Oh, that's right, it is. It's Great Britain. Here in the U.S., you can break any rules, laws, destroy any economy you like, and you just get further bonuses. That's how the bankers work in this country. And in fact, it turns out, of course, there are 12 banks involved, including U.S. banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, etc. But you say, hey, look, that hasn't been proven yet. And the poor regulators here in the U.S., they didn't know anything about it. I mean, if the Fed had known something about this, something as colossal, setting interest rates for almost all the assets in the world, I mean, $550 trillion.
It's a global scandal. Other big British, American, Japanese, and European banks could be dragged in.
In other words, yes, we absolutely knew.
They were aware of it.
In other words, we totally knew what was going on with LIBOR. Not only did we know there was a problem, we even sent in suggestions for how to fix it. Now, did you do anything? Did you take action? Did you go to the banks and say, hey, you stop fixing the LIBOR rate? I'm the New York Fed, the most powerful institution when it comes to banking in this country and perhaps in the world. Nope, didn't do a damn thing. Why? It's the same old Tim Geithner excuse he uses every time. Mike, it could have hurt the banks. We were in 2008. We were in a perilous state. And if we had taken action then, and it hurt, the banks were already in bad shape, and then if they didn't artificially keep the rates really low so that their balance sheet looked better, they might have gone under. Oh my God, the banks, my precious, lovable banks. I love you so much.
I think what's interesting about this latest scandal, the LIBOR scandal, is that it shows how widespread the corruption goes. That we now have banks not just cheating their investors, so mutual funds, pension funds, but also the depositors, i.e., the very people who put their money in banks. And
they cheated you. Yep, they cheated you and everyone you know.
Is this a regulatory lapse or a complete moral lapse that there is something absolutely rotten somewhere in Barclays Bank?
As Bob Diamond said only last year, culture is about how people behave when no one is looking. Yet it is at his organisation where people thought that they could do anything they like just to make a fast buck.
Now, here we have a 50-year-old man who goes crying to his, central banking mommy, Mervyn King, who's providing, they just need to clean up their little culture, that maybe they should be a little bit nicer and steal less.
You're getting paid these huge bonuses, but you haven't seen any of it. You must have been grossly incompetent in your job during that period of time if you weren't complicit in this.
So, is there a question?
Now, here is the Telegraph last week about Bob Diamond and Barclays. Is it time to consider locking up bankers? But that doesn't mean that outrageous, greedy behavior should be tolerated. It's not outrageous, greedy behavior, it's criminal behavior.
Fraud is fraud. I mean, there may be no specific offence that you can put your finger on that was mentioned in this, but if people have been cheating and fixing rates, that is presumably potentially fraud, isn't it?
Barclays Bank have been fixing this rate. It is fraud. And the chairman of Barclays Bank has had to resign.
Barclays makes a bad bet speculating in the derivatives market, like Jamie Dimon recently did over at JP Morgan. They make a bad bet, they lose some money. So they go into the LIBOR market, they commit acts of criminal negligence and criminal fraud to siphon off money, to go into their bank account, their balance sheet, to paper over their other criminal activities. So there's actually two crimes being committed here. First, they committed criminal fraud on the Barclays balance sheet. Then they went into the LIBOR market and committed criminal fraud to cover up the criminal fraud on their own balance sheet. So CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation, which is, by the way, run by Gary Gensler, a former Goldman Sachs guy, says two wrongs make a right. If you commit two egregious criminal actions, then pay a small fine. And by the way, that money will probably end up on deposit back at Barclays Bank. And you can continue doing what you've been doing.
Again, look at that headline, market rigging scandal. This is a crime. It is in the crime pages of the newspapers. It's not a little scandal.
This is corruption based on corruption based on corruption.
What we're now seeing very concrete evidence of is that the banks deliberately and knowingly submitted false data to benefit themselves.
They clearly believed they were above the law.
London is a very lightly regulated market, and that's why all this fraud and these misdemeanors take place here.
Because that's the reality of the situation. Okay, stop peddling that lie.
Okay,
hold
on
one moment,
Max.
Let's let Philip deregulation in London. There's no regulation. We can rehypothecate to infinity in London. Stop telling lies.
Max.
We answer calls for all police stations across London.
I wanted to report a possible crime.
Yeah, what's happened, sir?
Fraud is a criminal offence, isn't it?
It is.
So I'm reporting a criminal offence.
Okay, and I'm telling you, you need to go through to the bank anonymously.
Now that is fraud.
Right, okay.
So
So how did you get to know this?
it's on the news.
Okay, you need to speak to the bank ombudsman.
Fraud is a crime, I'm afraid.
That's right, that's why you need to speak to them.
There's open evidence of criminality.
Yes.
Okay? They have reams and reams of evidence of criminality at Barclays Bank and other UK banks and global banks. The government, the regulators, the CFTC, do nothing about it. And their plunder has been institutionalized.
Regulation will never be able to adequately correct for a poor corporate culture. The responsibility for that lies with the board of directors and the investors who appoint the directors.
When the entire population has their money stolen, not just a few people, but men, women, children, everybody, that's a financial genocide. Go to The Hague for crimes against humanity.
What is the judge going to say? How do you determine what degree of manipulation versus what degree of subjective judgment, if you will, on the part of the bank was factored into the price on a given day?
A Barclays employee tells the New York Fed analyst that the LIBOR rates are, quote, absolute rubbish. Okay.
You know what? Talk to any trader that's been in the credit markets going back before the 90s. In the 80s, you know what the topic was? Everybody knew LIBOR was massaged. This is nothing new.
There's this asymmetric approach to law and justice, where if you're rich and you're a crony of Cameron, there's one set of laws. If you're somebody else, then, oh, that's a totally separate set of laws.
I mean, this little thing about fixing the global interest rates. Who could get to that? Really? I mean, that's the whole point, right? To make sure that these banks aren't cheating? No, well, of course, if you know how the Fed works, it's the exact opposite. The whole point is to allow the banks to cheat and to gain all the advantages, because who's on the board of the New York Fed? Well, it's all of the top bankers. So they get to set the rules for themselves. And then they get a lackey, a tool like Tim Geithner, who they appoint as the head and go, well, he's not a banker. Look at that. He's very independent. Everybody else on the board nominated by the top banks. And golly gee, it turns out our tool, Tim Geithner, let us cheat.
Bob Diamond is simply trying to say that, well, I won't do it again. I'll pay a small fine. Please don't, look at my books. I mean, if you looked at Barclays' books closely, you would find a whole litany of additional criminal behavior. But who's going to do that? The FSA, the SFO, they're totally compromised by these banks to claim to be self-regulated. There's nobody actually going to do any forensic look into the books of these banks like Barclays. Why speak for or about Bob Diamond when we can get Bob Diamond in the studio? So let's get Bob Diamond. He's here to talk about Barclays.
With Diamond Bob, we'll fix the job. Don't be fooled by a suit. It's a common looter, always on the rob, a fiddler by trade. We'll fix the race, cause he's got it made. So long as we fail to regulate against Diamond Bob, we'll fix the job. Don't be fooled by a suit. It's a common looter, always on the rob, a fiddler by trade. We'll fix the race, cause he's got it made. So long as we fail to regulate his trade.
I'd like to apologize for those of you who think that some fragments in this video are too rude. In fact, it's a very gentle, intelligent way to say how frustrated people are about Barclays fraud. What is more, I need to mention that I did not include here tons of really disgusting comments and all the mud with dirty language devoted to this topic, which is available on the internet out of there. And the reason for that was I found an article on how Bob Diamond's daughter, Nellie, loves her father. And I was really touched by that. For Nellie, Bob Diamond is the best father in the whole world.
Very important to mention that this is Barclays that settled these charges this week, but there's every reason to believe that this is a widespread industry practice, and there's clear evidence of collusion. Barclays is getting a lot of the blame for this right now, but everyone was doing this.
The very reputation of the City of London, is it not, is at stake here.
The Financial Times is reporting that as well as Barclays, another 11 global banks will be implicated in the Libor scandal. And according to analysts at Morgan Stanley, the total cost of paying regulators and legal settlements could be 11.5 billion euros for those banks over the next 2 years.
Virtually every man, woman, and child in the entire world is affected by the manipulation of Libor. And more importantly, its very existence. And that is the real crime.
Blatant disregard for the law and also a clear understanding of what they were doing and that they were manipulating.
Shocking news. Turns out that the New York Fed, and hence, of course, the Federal Reserve, knew about Libor fixing all the way back in 2007, 2008. No, really?
The whole system is extremely corrupted at the moment. And it is corrupted with an objective which is fairly simple, which is to favor the banks who are on the edge of bankruptcy.
Is bankers doing the ultra-violent on our global financial system, whether it's rigging interest rates, rigging municipal bond markets, rigging? That's all they know how to do.
It is violence. It's a form of violence. It's a form of ultra-violence. And this is the biggest concept that people have trouble getting their mind around, is because they think these are victimless crimes. They don't see them as being particularly egregious. And yet they are really the 21st century version of the pogroms we saw in the last century. The incredible devastation that was done using traditional means of warfare, tanks and guns and soldiers. This is violence committed by accounting fraud, securities fraud, currency wars, and the result are the same. You've got a concentrated group of folks trying to grab most of the world's assets, and the rest of the people are suffering austerity and dying and starving. And it's the same thing played out with different weapons. These are financial weapons. The Libor scandal shows the Bank of England is rigging markets. Okay, so I don't know what more you need to be aghast at how corrupt this global system has become. We know what happens with the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington. It's happening with Mervyn King and Bank of England in the UK. They're colluding with Bob Diamond to rig markets on a $300 trillion plus a market, you know, so this is beyond just mere fiddling of the books. This is a wholesale Pearl Harbor attack on the financial system. You know, going back to those the revolution in Cairo, because of the spike in food prices are priced in dollars, and dollars tied to LIBOR, and LIBOR is manipulated. So those revolutionaries in Cairo should be on Wall Street demanding, you know, a regime change from J.P. Morgan, right?
You know, nobody should be surprised that we have yet another corruption scandal being done by one of these global too-big-to-fail banks. This is their business model. They are based on and have been based on for a long time of making as much money as quickly as possible in any way that they cannot get caught. They were given the green light that there were basically no rules that applied to them and they could do whatever they want. And took them about 7 years. And the same people who did that, the same executives with the same business model that crashed the entire financial system in 2008 are still running these banks. You know, Diamond didn't just get to Barclays. He was there throughout the run-up and the good times through the scandal. And we're facing this scandal now, and there's going to be more. To the extent that anybody keeps looking, because the entire business model is corrupt and rotten to its core.
And the media is no better. The Guardian newspaper runs a story saying, well, you know, Barclays attempted to manipulate interest rates. No, Guardian, they manipulated interest rates. Scratch the word attempted.
The politicians have come out with nothing. They are talking, opening their mouths a bit at the moment, but they're not going to in fact accept that they are complicit, and that is the system itself which must be reformed. Nothing is being done because the politicians are essentially in the grasp of the bankers.
This actual conspiracy involving all these parties, Serious Fraud Office, FSA, Barclays, Cameron, Osborne, and the press in the UK, including The Guardian. This is a conspiracy, a racket. The result is people are suffering. Austerity is being imposed upon them unnecessarily in a cruel and unusual fashion from the government, whose only motivation can be sadism, because there's no economic justification for not locking up the criminals, but forcing society to undergo massive, cruel, and unusual austerity.
Well, to show a more balanced picture, I need to mention that some people might say that formally it seems Barclays didn't break any law. That is probably the main peculiarity behind the LIBOR. It was designed to look like it's beyond reach of any government regulation. To the degree some even wonder what exactly guilt Barclays accepted for by paying its fine of $451 million. Because formally, LIBOR is just a kind of internal gentleman's agreement between participating banks, or at least it looks like it is. It's not even an actual interest rate, as many people may suggest. Rather, it's a purely subjective value of what banks believe their rates should be. So, what the fuss is all about?
What we understand LIBOR to be and what it is in fact are perhaps two different things.
Sitting at its center in London, LIBOR is perhaps the single most significant and far-reaching instrument in the entire financial system.
LIBOR reference rates deal with the cost of money 1 year and less. You see, I've written a great deal about interest rate swaps controlling the long end of the interest rate curve. The LIBOR side of it is the control of the short end of the interest rate curve. So the two go hand in hand. LIBOR is the control mechanism for the short end. The interest rate swaps are the control mechanism for the long end, and effectively it gives the puppet masters total control of the entire interest rate curve.
But I just don't know, when you get into a court of law, whether it's in the US or the UK, and you're trying to prove manipulation of something that's not really a market price, I don't know how easy that's going to be.
The
biggest victim of this is actually the financial system as a whole and the integrity of the financial system. It's just the latest example in the past several years of banks clearly acting in nobody's interest other than their own to basically deceive people and lie. And it's just incredibly damaging.
One of the things I fear is that the LIBOR scandal won't be the last scandal, that there will be others coming along. I fear, for example, that we might see some issues of fixing in derivative markets, those sorts of things which will be associated with the LIBOR scandal.
Just consider this. Central banks are manipulating rates. What's the difference? I guess if it's called LIBOR, it's illegal. When central bankers do it, it's okay. I don't know.
Yeah, we've been saying that.
Yeah, we've been discussing that.
Yeah, but
the real scandal is 0% interest rates at the Fed and at the and the low interest rates at the Bank of England. Look, the real scandal here is the behavior of central banks over the last 4 years, flooding Europe and flooding the United States with money, bringing us to the brink of another recession and the potential for real inflation in our future. That's the real scandal.
Yes, I think there's a very wide area where there's market rigging going on. I mean, if you take the role of the Fed, interest rates are being manipulated. If you take the area of precious metals, you'll see gold and silver regularly manipulated downwards by massive short positions held by the major banks, perhaps on the account of the government, if they're honest enough to say so. You can see the price of oil heading to $90 at the moment. So there's a very wide range of areas where prices are deliberately manipulated.
Gold is, we know, rigged. They keep dumping it into the marketplace, crashing the price down. Because if gold goes up, it's a clear indication central banks' policies are failing. Gold's totally rigged. Is the LIBOR rate, expose, is that indicative of how not just gold, but pretty much every market's rigged?
But what's underneath the LIBOR scandal? The price of gold, the price of silver, Goldman Sachs, and Alan Greenspan.
Let's see, allegations of interest rate rigging. The Fed Reserve buying 60% of the treasuries last year kind of rigs the treasury. It gives it false demand. Allegations of rigging the gold market. Allegations of rigging the silver market. On CNBC, even the anchor said, "Oh yeah, the silver market's rigged." This was done recently. Rigging IPOs and shenanigans, chicanery involving that, like for example, Facebook. The $100 billion Facebook IPO. And to me, it just smells and reeks of desperation at the system.
When you have the LIBOR rigging and you're essentially manipulating the price of money, whether you're directly manipulating gold or silver or not, doesn't make any difference, because you're manipulating the price of interest rates. You're manipulating the price of money itself, which is, in this case, the dollar, which is how all commodities in the world are priced.
The whole market is rigged. We have proof now that the market is rigged. It's no longer just me telling you the market's rigged. No, now we know it's rigged.
Barack Obama thinks this. Timothy Geithner thinks this, is that they, just like these bankers think that they need to cheat in order to succeed, these banker-stroke politicians are also going to think the same thing. We need to cheat, otherwise somebody else will. We need to do it first, otherwise the Chinese will do it, and they'll get ahead of us. So this is their rationale.
Now, it's not always to say that the manipulation is detrimental to the system. As I say, if the interest rates were not manipulated, you could be looking at a major crash. But at the end of the day, what we're living in at the moment is a corporatist capitalist system and not a free capital market system at all.
The recent news about the manipulation of the London interbank offering rate is not just another scandal. The LIBOR scandal, as it's being called, or LIBORgate, is coming to be known as something entirely different, in fact. The effects of what is now coming to the surface are severe, and the implications far-reaching. What the American people are witnessing now with respect to the breaking news about LIBOR is an obituary announcing the death of the London-based transatlantic financial system, and its funeral is not far behind.
London's reputation as a financial centre is at stake. Several banks are now under investigation for manipulating LIBOR, the interest rate at which some of the biggest banks borrow money from each other.
The first thing to understand about LIBOR is that LIBOR itself is a criminal operation, the product of a criminal enterprise. It is not the case that this is some innocent interest rate which has been manipulated by criminal banks. It's part of a criminal system.
The Libor scandal is not about somebody manipulated interest rates. It's about revealing the fact that manipulation itself is possible, because it's simply an integral part of the system and always was.
LIBOR originated with the Big Bang in the City of London in the mid-1980s. And what the Big Bang was the transformation of the City of London. And it opened it up, it created a giant casino in London. The City of London was set up, the Big Bang was set up as the home of a giant criminal enterprise. And LIBOR was the interest rate of that giant criminal enterprise.
It's official, the shadow banking system is now bigger than the non-shadow banking system. That's right, it's bigger. The stuff you don't see, the stuff that's unregulated, the stuff that's destroying the planet is now bigger, many hundreds of trillions of dollars bigger than the so-called real economy. Again, the forged documents. We know from the mortgage scandal, the subprime scandal, that bankers forge documents routinely. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Countrywide Credit, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. They forge documents. Everyone on Wall Street forges documents. And I don't know a single broker I've ever met in the history of doing business on Wall Street that hasn't routinely forged documents. It's a daily thing. The space race has been replaced with the fraud race.
Yes. Some ideas I compiled in this movie may sound like sensation, but in fact there is nothing really new about it. The knowledge is freely available. We live in the internet age. Just don't be lazy to make your own conclusions. Speaking about Max Kaiser, I like this guy because he geniusly reveals many hidden aspects of financial world, and more important, because he has courage to speak openly about that. I'd like to mention his very first show, long before Libor Scandal. It's show number 1 out of several hundred shows he's made during the last years, where Max says the things that I think are still very important today.
Fraud is the basic operating system of the U.S. economy. The specialist system on the floor of the stock exchange has fraud hardwired into it. All the accounting methodologies of all the banks and all the corporations have fraud hardwired into it. Nobody is addressing the problem that in the U.S. fraud is the business model du jour of the billionaire class. Nobody wants to upset the billionaires for fear that they might unsettle the possibility that they themselves can become a fraudulent billionaire. It's the greatest scam in history because you've got millions and millions of people in the U.S. who, like Bernie Madoff's clients, know that there's a problem, but like the fact that they're getting these dividends
in a so-called shadow banking system. So they were operating in the shadows. The government allowed them to do it. The FBI didn't investigate. The SEC was asleep at the switch. And of course the media, looked the other way because the media was getting a lot of advertising from dodgy lenders and from credit card companies and banks.
So now we have this LIBOR scandal coming out, which has been going on ever since the beginning of LIBOR in the mid-1980s. This is nothing new. So it was never clean because it's all a giant criminal conspiracy, and it needs to be shut down and replaced with a new system, and that system is a credit system because you cannot fix this system. It is too bankrupt, it is too corrupt, it is too criminal, and it just needs to be shut down and replaced with something honest.
What must be understood is that this financial system's existence, its manipulation, and its effects show conclusively that the system itself, in which LIBOR is merely a part, is a massive criminal enterprise which must be shut down.
Wall Street is not Main Street. We don't need these banks. Iceland proved it. They had a disaster in terms of finance because of their top banks. And here's what they did. They arrested the bankers. And after nationalizing the bank, guess what happened? Iceland recovered. one of the best recoveries in the world right now. So of course there's another way if you actually care to protect the citizens of this country rather than the bankers.
The role of the federal government shrank from the protection of its citizens to the protection of the monetary system.
What readers shouldn't forget is the fact that this is the tip of an iceberg, really.
What the derivatives complex serves as, a lot of people try to characterize it as debt. The derivatives complex is not debt. What the derivatives complex is, it's a price control mechanism. It's a price control grid. And it gives the people who regulate and the people who have purview over the derivatives complex, it gives them control of all the strategic pricing, the price of capital, the price of energy, the price or the cost of capital itself. And these are the things where you see the control is instituted and is most pronounced. All these strategic things.
That is the foundation of banking industry, but foundation of that foundation setting price for the debt. It worked that way from the very beginning, but simply was hidden from the public. Bankers set prices. That's probably the only thing they do. Libor is a tool for bankers to set prices freely between themselves. What Libor's story reminds us is how bankers have always dealt with each other. Look, the price of their product, money, never is the same. Percentage in different banks depends on some uncertain and dubious factors, far away from real competition to produce a better product. It's actually the same product. It's not better. Nevertheless, as we see with the case of Libor, bankers simply decide between themselves what the price of money going to be.
These coterie of bankers, they control the prices. It's not a price discovery mechanism anymore. There's no market functionality anymore. There's a grid, as you call it. It's a global grid. LIBOR is part of that grid. And these guys decide at what price interest rate should be or at what price gold should be to satisfy an objective. Now, concurrently, there's massive unemployment, social unrest, revolutions around the world, huge wealth and income gaps, and revolution in the air. So what is their end? Is their end to foster revolution? Is that what they're trying to do? Because it seems like that's what's happening.
Their goal, in my view, is one world government, one world bank, one world currency.
It's hard to believe, but financial elite doesn't care about money. Why would they? If they simply can take as much money as they want and when they want, this is what being at the top of a monetary pyramid is all about. Speaking about Barclays, for example, it wasn't far ago its chief executive officers borrowed £7 billion from investors in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, instead of accepting bailout money from the UK government on much better financial terms. However, money itself is not a problem for bankers. It's you, 99% of the world's population, who care about money, who struggle in attempts to earn some money. But banksters are sitting at the top of a huge pile of really free money. The only problem they might have is how to legitimize their unlimited profit. BBC suggested that in that particular story, Barclays chief executive officers simply wanted to remove limitations to pay themselves multi-million bonuses, even for account of other shareholders. Some might say, well, there are just few fraudsters, and the rest of participants can compete fair. No, they can't. That's the point. Nobody is able to compete in a system with preset champions. Your business cannot compete fair with banks, corporations, big capital, and the law doesn't restrict them from doing anything they want. Big fines are incapable to restrict them because, unlike the rest of our world, they can take from the system as much money they want and when they want. So you cannot be better than they are, never. You can never beat them. They always will be at the top because they always can manipulate with price of money with such tools as Libor, and this corrupts the whole game.
Make the profits for the few people at the top of the system.
Realization that at the center of finance, at the center of the financial world, banks were ultimately manipulating, at the end of the day, the very price of money. And that's why LIBOR is so important.
So essentially what you're seeing is a systematized transfer of wealth from the ordinary citizen into the hands of the banks to bail out the banks and their close friends. That is the sad reality of the situation.
Transfer of wealth from the many to the few by using stolen credit that ends up back in the economy by sky-high prices.
Today, you don't rob banks unless you're an idiot. You rob the central banks because that's where the credit is.
Question: where did the Fed get most of the $7.7 trillion? Answer: they created it out of nothing.
The dollar is a pyramid. This is no secret. The dollar lies on the basis of the global financial system, which is also a pyramid. It's a big question whether the financial system could have been organized otherwise. The global financial system is based on a pyramid. All the banks are also pyramids. This is no secret.
The manipulation or the abuse of a financial instrument that adjusts interest rates for interbank lending is not the problem per se. The existence and the operation of LIBOR itself is a stunning indictment of our entire monetary financial system as it's been shaped since its introduction.
It's about control.
Control the flow of weapons, control the conflict.
No. It's to control the debt that the conflict produces. You see, the real value of a conflict, the true value, is in the debt that it creates. You control the debt, you control everything.
So banks control debt, and Libor controls percentage of the debt. Now, considering that money itself is a pyramid of debt, and that process of setting Libor has ultimately subjective nature, Libor is a tool for creating money, just at the wish of bankers.
Да? Я вот прочитал у вас на сайте фразу, почему во всем мире борются с пирамидами. Вы пишете, потому что пирамиды производят деньги. Да-да, именно так, деньги из ничего, из воздуха.
Правильно. А деньги только из воздуха и производятся.
Деньги производятся только...
Они только из воздуха и производятся.
How one simple, principled measure will be the beginning of turning over the entire table. Not regulating, not making bankers accountable, but outlawing and abandoning the entire Ponzi scheme of a system, replacing it with an entirely new, just economic system.
Progressive taxation is a step in the right direction. The more you have, the more you owe to society, but it's not enough. In the case of Iceland, authorities actually did not bother about searching for a reason. 200 criminal cases is a pure formality, again, to hide the fact there always has been the debt of bankers at the top of their pyramid to those at the bottom who actually provide the pyramid with the money. There are insiders. How to compete with them? How to fight bankers? With fines? They are not afraid of fines. The only solution to create a situation in which they appear in somebody else's pyramid, which is bigger, because what they are really afraid of is existence of other pyramids. Let me tell you about my personal experience of dealing with Barclays. I have a savings account with Barclays Bank. It was a long time ago when Barclays made some mistake with my account. I have no intention to speak in public about what kind of mistake it was. It would be embarrassing for Barclays, as it was a really serious mistake, but Barclays appeared reluctant to correct its mistake. So, about 4 months ago, I sent a letter personally to Bob Diamond, as well as other chief executive officers, to the official address of Barclays headquarters. And what I did in that letter was setting up my own price for the mistake of Barclays, £1 million, provided they paid immediately. However, up to now, they failed to do that. So today, with this video, I'm setting my price for Barclays Bank to $3 million. And if Barclays decides to do nothing about my case, starting from September, the price for the settlement will be kept increased at the rate of $1 million per day. What I'm doing by this is creating a situation in which Barclays Bank appears in a debt. It's really the only way for me, an ordinary person, to compete with the bank. Bankers left us no other choice. Look, I am outside the Barclays pyramid. I cannot compete with it fair, so I am building a kind of my own personal pyramid based on my personal life story. The pyramid in which Barclays is at the bottom, in which they owe me. And the price for the Barclays debt to me is set on a time counter. It's ticking, Barclays. Your debt is constantly increasing. Time is money.
But this is the very essence of the banking industry. To make us all, whether we be nations or individuals, slaves to debt.
I want this movie to be my last appeal to Barclays. Really want. The question is whether they want it. Bob Diamond clearly doesn't. By the way, as a special offer, my price of $3 million I propose to Barclays is only $2 million if they pay it within a week since publishing this video. Do you think Barclays decide to save $1 million for their shareholders and start the requested money transfer within a week? It takes just a couple minutes to implement this. Since April, when I sent my letter to Barclays, they had more than enough time to complete any investigation they wanted, and the fact of their not responding I understand only as they simply do not want to pay me. They know they will need to pay me anyway. My case is too serious. Bob Diamond simply decided not to respond to me, and now he's gone. The rest of chief executive officers know that delay with settling my case will cost the Barclays millions and millions more, but seems not care about interests of shareholders. Officially, the Barclays ship is without captain now, but for their chief executive officers, as I told you earlier, money is not a problem. They can always find a way to take from the money pool as much as they want. So the question is really this: are they care about their shareholders or not? You will see this in a week.
Some professors and analysts say it's one of the biggest financial scandals in history.
So Barclays LIBOR fraud, many insiders call the biggest financial scandal in the history. Why? Because of the scale. But bankers in this case simply didn't know how much exactly they stole, and actually didn't care. And that probably hints us the right answer. It's the biggest scandal in the history for the degree of evidence that reveals the most hidden secret behind financial industry. Banks can create money out of nothing. LIBOR is one of the secret levers that enables bankers to do this. It's a quite real tool that ultimately allows banks to own the whole world. And this secret feature of creating money out of the air has always been a part of the money. But I'm afraid bankers are not ready to discuss this topic openly.